Game over. It is game over.
Game over, cancer. I'm Val Solomon, Director of Program Impact at Cannonball Kids Cancer Foundation.
And I'm Dana Nichols, Executive Director of CKC.
Game Over Cancer, a podcast dedicated to exploring conversations about pediatric cancer research, solutions, and inspiring family stories.
We're a nonprofit dedicated to creating innovative treatment options for kids fighting cancer and educating for change.
By creating a space for these conversations, we empower the community to take action and provide tangible hope.
Game over, cancer. Screw you, cancer. Well, I'm so excited about today's guest because I think we talk about science, we talk about some of the struggles, but more than anything, I think what we found today was so much humanity in this work.
Oh my gosh, yes. What did he say? Being a human first and then a professional second?
Yes. But I think in doing that, he's one of the most professional people we've ever spoken to. How funny is that? What they do coincide.
I'm thinking of switching careers, quite frankly. I want to go work in that lab.
I get it. I will see you on the tours.
Okay.
when we still come by. But we're really excited for this episode. Please hear from one of our newest young investigators, and you'll see that when you invest with CKC, we really are investing in the best people.
Our guest today is Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Michigan Medical School. His research interests focus on the molecular mechanisms and driver genes of brain cancers such as medulloblastoma, ATRT, and DIPG. He's the recipient of the 2025 Young Investigator Grant from CKC for his research in relapsed medulloblastoma. Please welcome Dr. John Prensner.
Yay! Hello.
Thanks
you
for being here.
Us.
It's so great to join you today. Thanks for hosting me, and it's wonderful to be able to talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been looking really forward to this conversation. We love talking to people who have received Young Investigator awards because it really is like the beginning of like a lot of the work that we will hopefully fund in the future and the beginning of big ideas. And I want to kind of highlight something that I found in doing a little bit of research that also highlights the conversation we had when I was up to visit in Ann Arbor, which is all roads either start or lead back to in some way Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. We were talking about all the researchers and, brain cancers tend to be a smaller group of folks that are all working in the same world. So you started at Tufts and then did your MD and PhD at University of Michigan, clinical training in pediatrics at Boston residency program, and then clinical fellowship at Boston Children's and Dana-Farber, postdoctoral at MIT, Harvard, and then returning back to the University of Michigan to join the faculty. And then we meet, and Dr. Prensner goes and shows me around the hospital, and there is a picture of him graduating, with his graduating class. And I was like, it's a real full circle moment.
Wow, for sure.
Yeah, everybody that we chatted about, people who were getting grants, people who had trained, they're all a part of this community. Some of them met at Dana-Farber, but it's like it really was the beginning of a very collaborative theme for the visit. And so I guess tell us a little bit about, how you got started in pediatric cancer as a researcher, why medulloblastoma? If you could share with the audience, kind of root in who you are as a researcher to get them started.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been wonderful to have this journey in life, and being in Michigan now and Dana-Farber previously have really just built on each other and sort of this really wonderful community that you mentioned and how we're all connected. I'm here as a pediatric brain tumor doctor, mainly because of people I've met and patients I've encountered along the way that have been both heartbreaking sometimes and also inspiring in other ways. I think it can be a little bit of both. I started out, many years ago at this point, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. I think maybe there are some doctors who may have known that they wanted to be a doctor when they were in elementary school. That was not me. I didn't really sort this all out until later into college. And I started working, sort of volunteering, I should say, in a hospital in Boston and worked for a little bit in their ICU for a short time. And the reason why I'm here as a brain tumor doctor is in this adult ICU. I met a young mother who was in her early 30s, and she was dying of brain cancer. And I was just really taken aback. I guess, I was still young in life, but I knew that cancer happened, of course, but I sort of thought of it as like something that kind of happened to my grandparents. They were maybe older people getting cancer. I had only ever known, like, my grandfather had prostate cancer, and that's kind of what I knew about cancer thing. And so here before me in the ICU was this young woman who was not that much older than I was, and she was in a very sort of sad part of life. She was in a hard moment for her, and she had a family also. So that just, I wouldn't leave me, that person, that face. And so I went to medical school thinking about her, and ultimately gravitating towards young people with cancer, which landed me in pediatric oncology. She was a young adult, but as you may know, we have patients in our clinics that are young adults that come to pediatric oncologists and are on our clinical trials. And so she was a big motivation. When I was also a medical student, as what we call a third-year medical student, which at that time was when students transitioned from being classroom-based, like, studying to take tests, and then moving to be in the hospital where you actually like saw a patient and talked to a patient and did those sorts of things. So I was a third-year medical student on pediatric oncology. And that's where I've met my first young woman with medulloblastoma. She was an adolescent in her early teens, and she had just such a course with this disease, but was so brave and inspiring that I really just took that home with me. And I think really the combination of those two patients helped me move to where I am now.
Wow.
It's usually, yeah. I mean, we ask that question to a lot of our researchers, and it's usually one or two stories of like, there's a couple experiences that really just drive home what the need is. And I think it takes a special person to be like, and I'm going to be a part of helping solve that problem for
100%.
patients going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about we started talking a little bit about collaboration. And one thing that, as we've gotten to know each other, that I really felt deeply when I visited is the collaboration in your program and in your research. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to work in an institution that really is helpful and supportive in that way, and colleagues that have the same type of stress the same type of importance on collaboration and what that means for you and your research?
Absolutely. I think we go into medical science, we go into scientific research because we want to help patients, right? Like the patients that we're just sort of talking about. And I think once you go through this long training path of, in my case, getting both an MD and a PhD, but then also going through residency and fellowship and all of these things, at the end of it, I think one of the major feelings, at least that I had, and I think many people that I know had, is just this humility of, gosh, we know so little. And as an individual person, I can only accomplish a small sliver of what I hope to see the change occur. We want to see these big changes for patients, but I can only do so much. And so it's really important to find these communities and institutions where you can couple with others and work together and have a sort of a shared mental understanding, a shared community space of saying, you know what, we're in this together, and I have my lab and you may have your lab, but really we're just part of the same effort to work together. And so there's only benefits from joining forces rather than anything detrimental from joining forces. So that's something that I've experienced tremendously in my career at the different places I've been, at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, at the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT for my postdoc, here at the University of Michigan. I'm deeply fortunate to work with people not just only at the University of Michigan or at Dana-Farber now. We also work with a number of collaborators across the country, across the world. We do a number of projects with different collaborators in Europe at this point. And it's really just a special feeling to be in a pediatric oncology community that globally recognizes the need to work together. I think that's something that I've benefited from tremendously. And when I think about sort of my career and my trainees, it's something I'm trying to impart to them to kind of keep that spirit alive.
Yeah, I think kind of diving more into that, one of the things that I see is another form of collaboration or even like a ripple effect of information and knowledge sharing that comes when we're funding young investigators. So, I mean, as I would assume, the goal as a young investigator is I'm going to have my own lab, I'm going to set up, I'm going to move into clinical trial. But part of developing that is first working in someone else's lab or even seeing how that all works. And then when you have your lab, you can have other people working in yours. You wind up telling people that maybe are going to school but not for pediatric cancer research about the field more. They can take that into their line of work later or stay. And so I think what's really interesting about the collaboration is how deeply it runs into forming futures for others. And I wondered if you could speak to having others work in your lab or even other labs you've worked in that kind of are getting you to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such an important area of career development and science and medicine. And I think it speaks to actually a change over time. I think in the way that we as a community and maybe as a culture kind of view how science is done. And I think I'm going to speculate. I wasn't really old enough to be a scientist in the 1980s or 1970s. I wasn't even born in the 1970s. But I want to say that my understanding of medical science some decades ago was after you did your training, you did your medical degree or your PhD or your postdoctoral fellowship. After you did your training, you kind of had to like go out. And it was sort of like an isolated journey into the wilderness. And sometimes you see this in like, stories, folktale stories, where it's like, the person needs to leave their hometown and go like journey into the unknown,
right? Because
they have to leave their home to like form their own identity.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of like folk stories about the like journey into the wilderness to find your identity. And I think that's kind of the way science had been. That's like you did your training and then you had to like go out and sort of forge your own identity out there alone somewhere. I'm not sure that we believe that's the way that it needs to be done now. I think now I view this process, and I think some of my colleagues and peers view this process as more like a family. So, if you have a family and you've got first cousins and second cousins and aunts and uncles, well, it's like, if your uncle has a new baby, it doesn't kick somebody out of the family to make space for that one person, right? Your family just expanded by one. You didn't have to kick somebody out to let somebody in. And then as that person grows up, they're still your cousin and they're still part of your family, and you forge your own identity, because certainly I have a lot of first cousins and we're like really, really different. One of my first cousins like went to go study tornadoes in college. I'm like, my gosh, I would never go and study tornadoes in college. So, just because we're the same family doesn't mean you don't forge your own identity, but it means that you're constantly surrounded within that structure of having people who are supportive around you. You don't have to like go off into the wilderness by yourself. So that's how I view this idea about training and forming your own research program and forming your own sort of scientific quest. I see it together in a family atmosphere, I guess, at this point.
I love that metaphor.
I know. That's so cool. And it makes me, I haven't thought about this in years, but I did, graduate school in anthropology for a while. And you could it was like a hobby to trace back people through their mentors. And it was almost like a family tree, but of like academic thought. I wonder if something like that happens too, where it's like, oh yes, I know a little bit about that person having just met them because I know they come from this lab and that mentor and this program. Can you kind of get a sense of who they are based on where they come from a little bit?
That's absolutely true. And I think that's true in pediatric brain tumor research. I think that's actually even more organized in the math community. You may or may not be shocked to know that there's actually a website for mathematicians where you actually can trace, like somebody loads in the math community who worked with whom.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not sure that we're that organized yet in cancer research, but yes.
That sounds like something a mathematician would do, right? It's like on brand.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear more about building out your lab and bringing people to the table that you think are, the right fit and how you're building that out as you proceed in your research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where are your cousins?
Our lab is, I'm just really, every day I feel so fortunate that I have this wonderful group of people in our lab that are so motivated to try to work to help children with brain tumors and children with cancer. And they come to the table with all sorts of different backgrounds and sort of ideas and how they shape it. So the way that we've kind of worked our team and start to build our team is to find people who are really passionate and want to make a difference and know how to work together with others in the group so that we can leverage our different skill sets. Our lab studies the root causes of childhood cancers. We let us study kind of what is it that makes them tick? What are the genetic changes that happen? How do those changes then have sort of downstream cascading effects on what the cancers are doing? And to address those questions, we have people in the lab that, are purely focused just on computers and computer science, because there's a lot of data analysis that needs to happen at a really high level. We have people in the lab who are focused exclusively on how do you develop models for that? How do you develop a better way to test new drugs, new compounds in mice or in other models? We have people in the lab who are mainly interested in thinking about what are some of the key players in this? What are some individual genes that are the key genes that we have been looking on before? And how do we sort of integrate across those different types of skill sets is really important. So when I'm building out my team, I'm trying to think to myself, how are you going to fit in the team? Can you work together with these groups? I guess I'll be honest with you. I'm not likely to bring somebody into my lab who I think wants to work alone, because that's just not how I do things. I want people to work together.
Yeah.
So that's something that I look for. And I think about, which of these areas do you feel like you're strongest in? Because we're not strong in all of them. Nobody is. But what's important is that you recognize, here are the strengths that I can contribute in the areas in which I can grow. And then here are the other areas where I want to work with the other people on the team to do more together than we could do individually.
So fantastic. I was telling Dana after my visit to your lab that outside of the lab, there's the bulletin board with the world map, and everybody has the little picture at the bottom and then like the little string so that you can see where each person came from. And it's just such from everything from the way Dr. Prensner and colleagues spoke about collaboration to what you see on the walls to how everybody like worked together. It was all about like team effort the whole time I was there. I came back and was just like, well, that's an example of a wonderful team,
Yes.
And something for us to strive to. And I wonder, so it sounds like you are, and my experience from just seeing you in the lab is that you are a wonderful mentor for these folks coming into this lab. What is your, I guess, ethos on helping people develop? Are you trying to get people to come in here and it's secretly what we all want is that they're going to be in brain cancer research, but not everybody, will everybody go on to that, or will they take what they've learned here and apply it in different places? And how do you balance all of that?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you. And thank you for sort of complimenting mentorship. I guess you'd have to ask the people in my lab to get their opinion.
Well, they didn't run from the tour, so that's a good sign.
Yeah. What I try to do is just work with each person and figure out what makes their work meaningful for them, right? And every one of us is a single person in this world, right? We're a human first, and we're then, a professional in a job second, and then we have other things going on. And so everybody has sort of some feelings about what makes their life meaningful. And part of that is professional work. I am a childhood cancer doctor. I see patients with brain tumors and we do research on them. But, other parts of my identity are, I'm a dad and I've got kids, and, I do these other things in our community that are not professionally intertwined in that way. And that's what makes my life meaningful. If I were only working in pediatric cancer, well, that would be somewhat meaningful to me, but I think it would not be as good to then as if I then have, my family and the other things in the community that sustain me and help sort of keep me going day after day. So the same is true for my students in the lab and my trainees in the lab. And I try to figure out what sustains them and makes them want to get up and come to work. And that's how you start to figure out what their long-term paths are. There's some people in the lab who I think are highly interested in going into cancer research as sort of their end all and be all and the goal. I think there are other people in the lab who are more sort of thinking about, well, how can we use technology like machine learning or AI or other computational things that we're doing? How can we use those technologies to enact transformational change that could include cancer, but it might not include cancer? And I'm open to both of those because I think, people go through this journey. We go through life once, as far as I know. We go through life once, and you can't really go backwards. You only kind of go forwards. So people are in the lab going forwards in their lives and trying to figure out what their best self is and how they bring it to their work and their future.
Mm-hmm. I want to be in your lab.
Yeah.
I know because it's not our world, but like in my mind where it's like you're to the point where you're working in a lab on brain tumor cancer research and it's like, I still don't know what I want to do with my life. Isn't that everybody? Like we're all like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up yet. And
Sure.
to other people, it's like, it feels like you're on a path, but we're all just trying to be humans in a very complicated world and finding our way.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. What you said, I think we're all highly motivated and we all want to make a difference. But even I, sometimes I wake up and saying, am I really doing the things that I think I should be doing to make the difference that I want to have? And, are we doing the projects that I think are the right projects? Am I doing the collaborations that I think are going to be the most impactful collaborations? And so I think we all, as just humans going through life, have these questions that are important and help us, and they help clarify our thinking and help us get where we should be. And if we can find where we should be, then we can do the most help that we can for other people. Right. And so I feel very grateful to be in a childhood cancer environment where I feel like I could be my best person in childhood cancer. And I just hope everybody can, find that place in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we speak to finding your fit a lot. And especially, I think, I think some of that questioning for me and projecting a little, but like speaks to the scope of the problem, right? And the lack of funding too, because it's like, am I going on the right path? Am I doing the right thing in this space? Because there's so many limits and barriers. And so, but the problem is so big. And so you can really, I know even for us, are we funding the right things? Do we have the right grant programs in place? Do we have what people actually need to get their work done? Because the problem feels so expansive, it is. And thus you feel like, we're doing something. And I think at the end of the day, it's very hard to ever feel the enoughness in it.
So true. And I think when we're faced as the doctors and as the scientists, when we're faced with difficulties in getting funding, it's certainly a moment where you're thinking to yourself, gosh, am I going in the right direction? Yes or no? And I think these are really important questions. What I can share from my experience is that sometimes having difficulty getting funding clarifies for you that maybe that project wasn't quite crafted in the way that was optimal and you should rethink it. Other times I've had situations where I felt like, I'm pretty convinced I'm right and I just need to communicate this better.
Right.
And then it might take a couple rounds before you get it through. And I think both of those are sort of valuable experiences to go through.
How do you, we're on the topics of, having your research, applying for grants, but also being a mentor. How do you help your mentees and your trainees develop the type of resilience, like academic resilience of, applying for these grants and getting turned down, but also like making the most of the awards that you do get? How do you, as a mentor, show up for those folks as they're learning that type of resilience?
Yeah, resilience is, I think, a really great thing to try to teach or to try to cultivate, within your team. I think it starts with being honest, right? I think sometimes we feel in our profession that we want to showcase our successes, and I think that's valid. I think it's important to celebrate your victories and showcase your successes. I think the flip side of that is sometimes somebody will only see your successes and feel like, oh gosh, they're successful all the time. And so I think the first thing that I do is share with people how much failure I've had, right? How many times I submit something and it doesn't get funded. How many times I've submitted a paper for publication and it got rejected and we had to reformat things. How many times I tried an experiment in my own training before I got it to work. It's not like, I showed up in the lab as a PhD student and all of a sudden everything just worked. There was a long journey of things not working before you get some things to actually do something. So I think the first way that I try to help my trainees is just to understand that this is a sort of a normal experience, to feel like sometimes you have failure, sometimes it doesn't work out. I try also to instill sort of a belief in them. So I have people work in our lab because I believe in them. And I don't want people in the lab just to be hired to do sort of like a job without believing in the person. So I'm a big proponent of the person first and the job second. And so sometimes somebody will be struggling in their job because it's not working. There was a major issue with some contamination and we had to throw things out and start it over again. All of that happens. So you can have those struggles, but if you believe in the person, then they'll get sort of self-confidence and believe that they can work through it.
So beautiful.
That's so nice.
I know.
What a great space to be doing something so important.
Right.
I love hearing that. Knowing that you are going to have so many other things to do today. We always want to be conscious of our guest time, but we wanted to spend a little time, if you're willing and interested, in talking just a little bit about the broader landscape of pediatric cancer from a funding and federal funding perspective. Mm-hmm. We've done a few episodes to try and make sure that our audience, as things change or upend, that they're aware. And I wondered how you could speak to what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, this is a really important question. So thank you for asking. I would say that pediatric cancer does not get the funding it deserves. I think that it deserves more funding. My understanding is that the federal budget is approximately 4%, or I should say, the research portion of the budget in the federal government. Of that, about 4% of the research budget goes to pediatric cancer, compared to the rest of it going to adult cancer. And so to me, that's just not enough. And I think it's been not enough for a while. And I think it's even more not enough right now. And I think that there are challenges that are happening now that weren't happening in prior years. But I also think that the general theme of we need to support these kids better is a consistent one. So, I think in the childhood cancer community, we're extremely blessed to have foundations, such as yours and others that are extremely supportive and really help young investigators like myself get started and get things rolling. But ultimately, it's a partnership, I think, between foundations and sort of federal government and federal research programs that have to come together to support individuals. And so for me, the way that I sort of help teach this to my students or help people sort of process this and go through it, I think it's important to be able to know what types of proposals might do well at one place or another place. And so that's one thing that we teach. The other thing we teach, though, in my lab is pretty directly, how does one then try to advocate either to foundations or to legislators the importance of this funding? And I think that is a really key part of what we do as childhood cancer doctors, as childhood cancer researchers. It's part of our job and part of our duty to be able to sit down with somebody in a government, whether it's a state government or federal government somewhere, sit down with them and be able to talk about this is what we do and this is why it's important. Here's where the money goes. Because without the support of individuals and the buy-in from every person along the way, the larger sort of government apparatus isn't necessarily going to hear the message. You have to start at an individual level and speaking to the people first, and then they bring it back to sort of their groups.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder, you mentioned consistency, and we talk about consistency a lot, that it's a long game, that our successes and the results we're looking for, we invest in research now, and we might get results, 5 years from now, early on, 3 to 5 years, where we, when we are measuring our success. And I wonder, since we were talking about consistency, what your viewpoint and the impact that you've seen of the inconsistency or uncertainty of the threat of deep cuts. So not just it's going to be a little bit less than it has been before, we're going to have to move some money around it, but it seemed like a big upheaval, or at least a big concern for in the pediatric cancer research space when we were threatened with a 37% cut, which, as we know, Congress stepped in and we're looking at, retaining our funds. But what do you see, or what concerns come up for you when it's the threat that causes the chaos? What has been your perspective on the last, I'd say, 18 months of federal research funding and everything that everyone's gone through?
Yeah, it's really important. I think the first thing that I guess I say is just there's a tremendous, for me and I think many, a tremendous relief and gratitude that Congress has continued to support NIH research at the same levels that had been previously supported at. So that, I think speaks to the tremendous bipartisan nature of medical research, and particularly childhood cancer research. I think that's really valuable. So I want to give credit to that. I think the other part of this is the threat of instability, which you mentioned. And I think that also has real emotional effects on us as people, right? We're people first and we're, professionals second. And people feel very uncomfortable if there feels like there's uncertainty or potential threats to job termination. I think this is partly why, to my understanding, something like 10,000 or maybe even a little more PhD level scientists have left the United States in the past couple of years. Now, not all these individuals worked on childhood cancer, but some of them did, right? Some of them did work on childhood cancer. And that speaks not just to, say, like a funding level, because I'm very grateful to Congress for keeping the funding level stable. What it speaks to is, I think, a lot of the emotional insecurity of what's the environment, what's the sort of supportive atmosphere or lack of supported atmosphere, irrespective of dollar amounts of funding. And that is really prominent. And we certainly see that in my work. I think we see that in many, many work of people thinking about, where should I be doing this work? And is this the right environment, or should I seek a different environment? I think here, our graduate program, for example, has fewer graduate students entering in recent years because of questions about whether or not there would be stability of funding. Prior numbers of graduate students for so long. I think we're very similar to other institutions. Many institutions have published their numbers on this, on kind of how many students they take per year. So yes, it very much does affect us in terms of the number of students we're seeing, the pipeline of early career scientists, whether or not those early career scientists want to work in the United States or work outside the United States. These are all things that we've directly seen.
And I think really speak to the long-term impact of, a future of breakthroughs and a future of clinicians that are there for our children, and all the things that come when we don't have the research pipeline or the researcher pipeline to make sure that there are people ready to find that next breakthrough. It's really difficult.
That's right. And one of the things we've talked about for years is just the number of challenges facing pediatric cancer researchers. Just in there's less funding. There's more, it's harder to establish a career. It's harder to establish a lab than it is in other areas of research, even, adult cancers. And so one more hurdle was not what we needed, right? And so I do want us to just continue, and I thank you so much for sharing that, because unless we have conversations like this, people ask us what the impacts have been, and it's not necessarily what everybody thought might have happened, but even just the threat of cuts really does run off some of that talent, and how can we help keep it there is definitely something that is going to be a problem to solve in the future. Even with full funding. So, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. It's so important that we're able to communicate that to supporters of the mission.
And just in general, thank you for being here with us today. We can move to close out, but we're just so grateful for your time and your perspective. And it's so clear how thoughtful you are about every aspect of the work you're doing. It's really, really nice to have the time to talk to you about it.
Thank you. It's been just a joy to speak with you anytime. I'm happy to come on board and say hello.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, the reason CKC invests in innovative research is to make treatment options available to kids who need them. And that's certainly the work Dr. Prensner is working on. If you want to support the research and the researchers, you can make a gift on our website, cannonballkidscancer.org.
And we want to thank you for listening to Game Over Cancer and encourage you to leave a review because it helps us reach more listeners and educate for change.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you joining our fight and for making a commitment to help make a change. I'm Dana Nichols.
I'm Val Solomon.
And until next time, we'll CK.
See you later. Join us as we transform fear into courage and turn adversity into opportunities for change.
If you want to be involved in the conversations that create change in the world of pediatric cancer, take a moment, share, like, and subscribe. Absolutely. Cancer, right? Screw you, cancer. Get the heck out of here.